Okay, cool. Hope that's cool. All right. But yeah, thank you for joining ICCA's first education event. This is one in a series, right, that we're going to be doing through the fall. This is our first virtual event, right? So really excited about that. My name is Frank Pettis. I know I met most of the people on this call, maybe one or two people I haven't, but I'm the newish program coordinator with ICCA. Been doing this for a few months and really excited about the work. And we have a really good set of presenters today, right? We're gonna do some level setting with the board president, Bobby, and I hope that's cool. Call by your first name. Then we're gonna hear from one of our coalition partners at the state level, who's gonna talk about some of the work that they're leading over at the Illinois Environmental Council. And then I'm going to bring it back to the community, right, and talk about what that work that Danny's going to present on, the potential that ICCA has, means in the context of an environmental justice community, right? So I'll share a little bit about the community that I come from. But before we get there, I will call to our virtual stage the board president for ICCA. Bobby, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Frank, and thanks everybody. Let me just pull up my screen here.
Okay, and you got the ability to, gotcha.
All good?
Yep.
Cool. Well, first and foremost, I know this is the last week of summer, and I'm sure everybody's pretty busy. So just want to thank those that are in attendance and those that are watching the recorded version of this. This is something we're excited about and hope to present some information that is applicable to you. What I was hoping to do is just kind of level set, as Frank mentioned, talk about who we are, what our thoughts are, how we would like to engage you, our members, and those that are potential members to make some real change and difference in Illinois. So this is just kind of a review of who the Illinois Clinicians for Climate Action are. And I make the assumption that we're all clinicians. We're all in the healthcare space. So just to stay in that theme, I'm sure you guys have had this in presentations you've had in your professional setting, but I always like to start with a case when I give a presentation. So, and I think this is applicable here. So this is a real patient. So I'm to introduce myself, and I'm an emergency physician in Chicago. I've been practicing for 11 years. Um, and I had a patient come in, I would say about 4 years ago or 5 years ago. This is a 7-year-old girl. She had a known history of asthma, and she was at a friend's house. She was playing at a friend's house. It was a hot summer day, extremely humid, and she was running around in the backyard. And she would check in with her friend's parents, and they noticed she was a little short of breath, but she was having such a great time that they just let her play. And throughout the day, she got more short of breath, and her friend's parents started to notice to the point where she could barely say 1 to 2 words at a time. And so they recognized that this was an emergency, and they brought the patient into my emergency department. And by the time she actually ended up in my ER, her oxygen levels were in the 60s, and she wasn't responding. And her actually, for a moment of time, her heart stopped. Obviously, extremely traumatic. In the emergency department, we did what we need to do. We put a breathing tube in. We got her heart starting again, and I'm happy to say, ultimately, her health improved and she got back to her normal baseline. But after the case, obviously a traumatic case, I always try to debrief and think about what I could have done better, how we could have managed it better, and also think about why did this person end up in my emergency department in the first place? And I'd always been passionate about the climate crisis and addressing pollution. But this particular case, understanding that the effects of the climate crisis and heat and humidity and pollution can have on the lungs, and particularly asthma. Now, do I know for certainty that the climate crisis caused this patient to come into my emergency department? Of course not. But if you look at the data, you recognize that it has negative effects on the lungs, and very well, this patient encounter could have been avoided if we correctly address the climate crisis and pollution. I think that's why we're all here. We recognize in our clinical space and our clinical knowledge that there's this health effect that's already present and really hurting the people in our communities. So, just to provide an outline for the rest of my conversation, I just wanted to give a timeline of ICCA and who we are, talk about the people that have already been involved, and talk about what's going on in this intersection currently for climate and health for those that aren't actively involved yet, and also give just a landscape in Illinois about what's going on in Illinois to address the climate crisis. We'll also discuss, who are those collaborators in Illinois that we're hoping to engage with and build and develop relationships with, who are really doing a ton of work already. And we're actually going to meet an individual from one of these organizations, which I'm excited to hear about. And then the fun stuff. What's the road ahead? How can we, as an organization, get involved, make a difference, make change? And how can we get our members engaged in the opportunities for them to really make a difference as well? So, as I mentioned, this is our timeline. So, for those that aren't familiar with the medical consortium, so there's a National Medical Society Consortium of Climate and Health. It's a group of physicians, administrators, PhDs that work at a national level to develop education, to provide advocacy, and they also help with state level organization. Now, many states in America have organizations that are state-specific climate and health groups. Some are more advanced, some are kind of right at the beginning. As someone that has a 3-month old now at home, I think of stages of development, and I like to think we're probably at like the toddler stage. We're starting to walk and talk, and you can see that growth and potential, and there's a lot of enthusiasm that we're really going to drive ahead. So that's the National Consortium. A few years ago, they had a meeting and they discussed, they had advocacy. So every state got together. And it turns out there was a handful of people from Illinois that got together and introduced each other for the first time there. And after the meeting, we said, hey, we should do this more often. So we started having one-off events, providing education to specific certain venues, schools, medical societies. But we're all full-time clinicians, and so our bandwidth is pretty limited. And we really just couldn't develop momentum until we had our national consortium meeting in 2024, where we partnered with a nursing and climate organization, Annie, and really had this infusion of nurses and enthusiasm and momentum that was priceless and really helped us grow. And as a result, we've developed a steering committee, we've drafted and formalized bylaws, we developed a board of directors, and we were able to obtain some funding. And as a result of the funding, and you met him briefly at the beginning of this talk, we were able to hire a project coordinator, Frank Pettis. In addition, we hired a consultant to help us put together a strategic plan, and which led to our first virtual engagement opportunity here for this education event. So who is our board? Who are our people? Now, you've already met myself. Linda O'Kelly is a nurse and a PhD. That's our development chair. Sheethal Rao is in charge of coalition and collaboration. Ted Shea is the community outreach head. Heidi Woods in charge of education, and Grace Kistner, membership and recruitment. Now, this is only half our board. Our other half is our members at large. This includes Marie Cabilla, Holly Rosenkrantz, Jafia Ramkumar, Murda Sullivan, Julie Kennedy, and Regina De Leon Gomez. And with this group, there is a lot of passion and enthusiasm, a lot of engagement, and a lot of different interests. And all of these we're hoping to address as we develop as an organization. And last, and in many ways, most importantly, our project coordinator, Frank Pettis. As I mentioned, most all of us are full-time, have full-time jobs elsewhere and just had limited bandwidth. By bringing Frank in, having his previous knowledge and know-how and passion and motivation and skill set, I think is really going to exponentially grow our group. And we're really excited to have him participate and be incorporated within our community and really help us grow. And there's just a ton of potential with Frank on board now. And why is this important? Why, obviously, those in attendance, those watching the recording have some understanding of climate and health, but we really are at this very important intersection. And what I've always kept in my mind about addressing the climate crisis is that it's hard to engage people on penguins and polar bears. It's a lot easier to engage people when you're talking about their individual health. And who better to have those discussions on how the climate crisis is affecting an individual's health than a clinician. In addition, we're at the end of the day scientists. We can synthesize data and information and communicate it in a way that most anybody can understand. So we're really good people to kind of work through this body of scientific literature and knowledge and communicate why it's so important that we address it. And lastly, as this chart shows, we're amongst the most honest, considered most honest and ethic professions, according to this Gallup poll. And this includes nurses who have the highest rating, pharmacists, and medical physicians. So we are a trusted voice within the community. And as I mentioned, we're not alone. The Medical Society Consortium for Climate and Health is the national organization. As I mentioned, there's other state groups that we've actually worked with historically and are collaborating with in the future. Um, and then there's Illinois. And so why is Illinois really interesting and ex particularly exciting? That's something that we'll talk about in one moment. But I think what's exciting now is recognizing that despite the obstacles that are evident on the national level, this is a hard time to be a climate advocate, somebody addressing the climate crisis. I do think it provides an opportunity. I think it provides an opportunity for us to shift our focus at what we can achieve. And I really do believe, and our organization believes, that's something at the state level, at the community level, even at the city level, where there's opportunity. And the reason that we're so enthusiastic and optimistic about that is that Illinois has historically, particularly recently, been at the forefront of addressing the climate crisis, both through legislation and through the people that we elect to be our political leaders. So there's a lot of opportunity in Illinois. The ground is fertile for even further change because obviously more needs to be done. In addition, for our group particularly, there's a lot of opportunity for membership engagement and recruitment. As you can see from these numbers, there's about a 250,000 nurses within Illinois, 50,000 physicians, 14,000 PTs, 12,000 licensed pharmacists, 9 medical schools. If we could capture just a fraction of these people to lend their voice and engage them in addressing the climate crisis, we will have a huge effect on local, regional, and state legislation, advocacy, education, and really drive change within Illinois. And we don't have to recreate the wheel. The good thing is that there's a lot of organizations, one of which we'll learn about here in a little bit, that have been doing this work that we don't have to start from, square one. What we recognize is that we have a unique voice, and we can bring a unique perspective, and we're trying to see where we can get plugged in to really maximize our voice, maximize our momentum. And that's why working with groups like IEC and Respiratory Health Association and the ICJC, which has formerly helped pass the Clean Energy Jobs Act, is really important. And these are relationships where we've begun to develop and are excited to kind of bring forward. So now, with all that said, what's our future goals? So going forward, we're hoping to formalize our strategic plan by the end of this fall. Preliminary results from that kind of highlight things that we've thought were important already, which included further education events, membership recruitment engagement, strengthening our relationships with other Illinois organizations, and ultimately stepping into community involvement to help with those communities that are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis and pollution and lend our voice and our expertise to help their cause. And at the end of the day, our ultimate goal of this group is to make a difference. Now, there's a lot of, not to speak poorly of other groups, but there's a lot of groups that meet and talk and share education amongst themselves. And, kind of that's the end of it. Our goal and our mission is to make true change and really help our collaborations within Illinois make that change and really drive forward progress as we address the climate crisis. And with that said, there's an action item that's associated with today's meeting, and that's to write letters in support of the endangerment finding. And this is something that Frank will send out tomorrow, how you can write personal letters. But for those that are unfamiliar, the EPA is trying to roll back the endangerment finding. The endangerment finding states that greenhouse gases are a health risk, and given that gives them the power to address those. However, if these are rolled back, greenhouse gases cannot be addressed to the EPA. So this is a huge potential rollback and something that we as health professionals really need to lend our voice to address. So again, that is something that we'll send out tomorrow, and we really hope that you can send out letters and you can encourage your colleagues to do so as well. So with that said, again, we're happy that some of you can make it this evening. Thank you for watching the record of this discussion. If you have any questions for me or for Frank or for anyone, please feel free to ask now or put it in the chat. Otherwise, reach out to us afterwards, and we're more than happy to discuss further and see how we can get you engaged. Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Bobby. Um, yeah, covered a lot of ground there. And next, I'll turn it over to IEC's Legislative Relations Director, Danny Robles. And Danny, feel free to introduce yourself, and I will pull up your slides.
Thanks, Frank. And really happy to be on tonight. I'm sorry I can't be on camera right now, but you guys can see my lovely picture right there. That's from a few years ago, so I might look a little older now. But in that picture, y'all can see like our, at least my value statements. We care about climate, we care about care jobs, and overall just justice overall. And that's what brought me to this work. I started a lot of my advocacy around immigrant justice as a DACA recipient myself. And over the years, I've just come to contextualize that immigrant justice is climate justice, and really brought me to the work with the Illinois Environmental Council. So today, just want to talk a little bit about the work that we do, and just build this partnership with Illinois Clinicians for Climate Action, knowing that y'all have such a great value and mission statement. We really want to figure out how to maximize your guys' experience as frontline actors with people who are really feeling the climate, the climate crisis on an everyday basis, and making sure that the stories that y'all are collecting just don't go to waste, and that we bring these stories to people who can actually make decisions. So if we can move on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about IC and what we do. We have been around for about 50 years. We're actually celebrating our 50th year, our golden anniversary this year. But since 1975, we've worked to safeguard Illinois. So our people, our plants, our animals, and the natural systems we all depend on. And we do this by building power with each other. And over the years, IEC has grown to represent over 120 environmental organizations across Illinois. So one thing that I would love to know from y'all right now is, what part of Illinois are you guys calling in from? So if you guys don't mind putting that in the chat, would love to just explore that a little bit more, because I think oftentimes we get really concentrated in the Chicagoland area, but something that IEC really does a lot and cares deeply about is going out to all the communities across Illinois and figuring out what's happening in those communities that are, harming their environment, harming their pollution. So right now we're actually going down to Alton, Illinois. We're somewhere in between Springfield and East St. Louis on our way down to visit a training facility. So our work really takes us across all of Illinois. So I can see that, there's a lot of diversity in where we're going. So great. So we're coming down to your side of the woods this afternoon, and we'll be down there tomorrow morning in Alton. So our work really is concentrated on making sure we're talking to community members, we're bridging those gaps, being intersectional, and figuring out how the issues affect everyday people and how we can use our power collectively to make that change. So if we can go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. We, as in the Illinois Environmental Council, we cover 6 main issue areas that are very much centered and connected to the environment. And a lot of these are also connected to what we're feeling within climate change, right? We talk a lot about sustainable agriculture to make sure that the practices that our farmers are creating aren't harming our soil. We talk a lot about conservation to make sure we preserve our natural lands and resources. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work around clean energy and equitable transportation. That is a very core focus on what is driving a lot of climate disparity in our state and across the world, and really targeting to make sure Illinois is a leader in driving clean energy and innovation. And we also talk a lot about how do we maintain clean systems in our water and making sure that waste pollution doesn't make it to other avenues. So our work is really bringing in people who will have expertise in this work, connecting them to community members, and also connecting them to the decision makers that will ultimately make those final decisions. So most recently, we opened up our influence level to also talk about the federal government. We just brought in a state and federal manager, but historically we've worked a lot at the state level here in Illinois in Springfield. And over the last 5 years, we've actually strengthened our reach within the Chicagoland area by targeting city council in Chicago. So our work is really expanding on the three major government bodies and also connecting to all the different agencies and decision bodies that will drive change. Next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what our affiliates do. And this is really where I'm really excited to work with y'all in expanding this work. Like I mentioned, we have a deep geographic scope. We also have a lot of diversity in the size of our organizations that are affiliated with us. We work with all your big greens like the Sierra Clubs, the Natural Resources Defense Councils, the Environmental Defense Funds, Earth Justice, all the way down to local community groups who are really interested in gardening or just zero waste, cleanups, things of that nature, to really discuss all the different ways and ideas that we have to tackle the issues. And we work collectively with all these groups to put together our legislative agenda year after year to really drive that change. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Our work is to bring all our member organizations to the table to discuss all the different issues. So the 6 issue areas that I discussed at the top, we hold yearly policy development and planning calls to make sure that we are addressing what passed in the previous year at the state level, what work we heard within the state delegation, and figuring out what are our next paths forward. And really what IC does a lot is being on the ground in Springfield, talking to our legislators, finding those legislative sponsors, and helping navigate the process with our affiliates and making sure that we're identifying points where we've got to bring our affiliate partners to be experts in the State House or in City Council or at the federal government to make sure that we're bringing those stories. So I think this is an area that we can explore and grow with ICCA to ensure that as we're identifying legislation that will help clean up pollution, will help prevent climate disasters, that we're bringing in those stories, because I think we're hearing them year after year, the worsening of air pollution in certain neighborhoods throughout the state, or water quality issues, or plastic in our bodies coming in. And I think this is a great area where we can explore. So I do want to talk a little bit about some of the wins that we've gotten over the years. We have become the trusted resources for our state legislators to see the environmental policies and know that we have the experts that can drive those. So on the next slide, we'll talk just about some of the key highlights that IEC has completed over our 50-year history. I think this is really weighted in the last 10, 15 years. We had a huge presence down in Springfield beforehand, but I think we really reinvigorated IEC in the last 12 years with our executive director, Jen Walling, being down in Springfield and really developing key relationships with our legislators at the state level. And some of our core missions within that is growing what we call the Green Caucus, and that is making sure that we have a yearly growth in the legislators who will vote positively on environmental scores. So at the end of this week, y'all can keep your eyes open for IEC's environmental scorecard, where we will be releasing the score for this past year's legislative update, both for the state and the city level. And then we work very closely with our partners with League of Conservation Voters to also put a scorecard for the federal government. So we're really on that forefront to be watchdogs with the legislators and making sure that we are holding them accountable and also rewarding the legislators that are doing good work. And over the years, y'all can see that we really have been tackling some really big issues. Can you also hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we got you.
Sorry, my Zoom crashed, so I don't know if y'all can still hear me, but I'll just keep talking until you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we got you.
Great. So I think a few of the ones that I would love to talk about are, I think PFAS has been a huge point of contention. One that I didn't put on here that I should have is we actually just passed a PFAS ban this year that will ban PFAS on 5 products, types of products at the state level. So by 2032, we're going to have be one of the first states across the nation to make sure that those polyfluoroalkyl substances aren't in our consumer goods that are touching people's skins. One of the biggest ones that we've passed over the last 5 years is the Climate and Eligible Jobs Act. Originally, it was known as the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but through negotiations that got renamed. And really, this is one of the most progressive and ambitious climate bills in the nation. A lot of states are looking at this model to replicate how they're transitioning their power sector towards renewable energy. And the reason why this is so transformational is because we, as IEC, work very collectively with our partners in the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition to ensure that we were talking to community members across the state to figure out how do they relate to energy, what are their concerns, and really being conscious that there was a lot of community members that really relied on coal as a source of income, and making sure that we had the conversations on how do we transition them away from that work, and also figuring out that
Danny, I think we lost you. I don't know if you can hear us. Give him a couple seconds here. Can everybody hear me? It's not my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we can hear you. Let's give him a couple seconds, and if he lost connection, we can always go back to him.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we got you now, Danny.
Okay, great. Hopefully that's the last of the technical issues, but I could go on and on about all our accomplishments, but I don't want to take too much time on this. Y'all can feel free to go to IEC's website and look at all our legislative reports that we've had over the years and all our the bills that we've worked on. But do want to talk a little bit about what we did this year and what we're looking at in the next year and how we can collaborate with ICCA to ensure that we're moving some of these policies forward. So next slide. We worked again at the 104th General Assembly here in Illinois. In the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about our legislative overview, where we tracked over 500 bills across all the different issue areas. And just knowing that, we have our own bills that we work on with our partners. We drafted nearly 40 bills ourselves in collaboration with our 100 plus affiliate network. There were additional bills introduced, and then you always get bills that are anti-environment and anti clean energy and climate, and we are always tracking those bills to making sure that we are in opposition, holding people accountable, and being there on the front lines in the committee rooms to ensure that those bills don't move forward if they're going to be harmful for the environment. And with that, we mobilize hundreds of people to come down to Springfield on our lobby days. So also hear me?
Yep.
Great. Um, so I think another area where we can collaborate here is on our lobby day visits, where we invite community members across the state and we connect them with their lawmakers, with other people from their districts to ensure that we show our power of the climate movement, and continue to drive actions towards lawmakers to ensure that they're aware of what bills we're supporting and what bills we're against, to give us the momentum to make them across, get them across the finish line. And our big work is working in coalition with hundreds of um, partner affiliates. We work with like more formalized coalitions, like the Coalition for Plastic Reduction, the Clean Jobs Coalition that really focuses on energy and transportation, America the Beautiful that's really focusing on preserving our conservation areas across the state. And then our big goal too is to like make sure that the budget year after year is good for the agencies that are helping us keep our environment and climate clean and vibrant. Next slide. Talk a little bit about what's ahead of us. We know that there's a lot of chaos at the federal level, and I think this might be like an impetus of why people are looking to take action. And if you're like me, it was the 2018, 2016 timeframe that really like mobilized me to move away from my corporate job to do this work. And I think we're facing a very similar time right now. Here at the local level, we're seeing that there's going to be a lot of ambition and movement, with several of our federal delegation retiring this year. A lot of elected officials at the state level are looking to move up. There's also some statewide seats like comptroller that are being vacated this year. That's also moving a lot of people. So next year, we are anticipating that it's going to be a lower bill passage year. So, but we're being very tactical and strategic in what bills we're going to be moving. And I think the other piece that we are really battling right now is this influence of labor. And like we care about good jobs, like clean jobs. That's why we work very closely with Clean Jobs Coalition. But a lot of our opposition tends to be that labor is very hesitant to end some of their more polluting practices. And I think we're seeing year after year some of those challenges. And I think those are some of the ongoing conversations that we're looking to influence and involve, especially as we're like making sure we're bringing a public health landscape to a lot of our bills, and helping labor partners also understand how their current jobs are also harmful for their long-term health. So just a little more political context right there. And then some of our big wins this year, like I had mentioned, was the PFAS phase out. We're awarding Representative Rashid and Senator Morrison with outstanding award this year during our annual dinner, to highlight all the work that we went into making sure that we were passing this PFAS phase out. There was a lot of like challenging opposition from the Manufacturers Association that were hesitant on moving this, and we were able to get something that can be a staple and replicated across the country to showcase that we can protect our communities from some harmful substances. Other big wins that we had this year is we worked very closely on Indigenous Peoples Conservation Act to ensure that federally recognized Native American tribes have the ability to enter into conservation easements with existing organizations or nonprofits. And the other big one that we've collaborated closely with is protecting the Muhammad Aquifer. Last year, there was a big legislation on how to regulate carbon capture sequestration, but there were concerns that Muhammad Aquifer was not protected in that bill last year. So this year, we look to strengthen that protection to ensure that our public drinking water in the southern part of Illinois is not exposed to potential harmful pollution. Now, looking ahead for 2026, like I mentioned at the top, next slide, Frank, is where we know that we're going to have a little bit of a challenge with the ongoing um, changes at the state levels, but I think we're still going to be very ambitious in some of the bills that we're working on. So next slide, I'll talk about some of our priorities that are starting to bubble up with conservation and agriculture. One of our big priorities that we've been working on for the last couple of years is making sure we have protections on our remaining wetlands. Some of you might be surprised that we only have about 10% of our remaining wetlands in the state of Illinois. Most of the other wetlands have been taken over by other forms of land use. And with the second decision a couple of years ago, Illinois' regulations around wetlands is very weak compared to other states. So we're trying to make sure that we are pushing that forward to ensure that we have healthy drinking water and also refuge for flooding that we know is continuing to get worse with the climate changes that we're seeing in our natural weather here in the Midwest. Other priorities surrounding conservation and agriculture are getting more awareness of how pesticides are affecting people. There's been a lot of work that some of our partners within the Prairie Rivers Network have done to uncover that pesticide drift is a serious issue across the southern and central part of the state where a lot of farms are at. And we're seeing a lot of trees get decimated in public land and near parks and schools in those areas because of that drift that happens with pesticide and herbicides. So we're doing a lot of education in the last couple of years to introduce bills that really target that. So making sure we're notifying schools and parks when there is spraying, and also strengthening our operation licenses for pesticide use in other areas. And of course, we're always looking to make sure that we are strengthening the ability to have good food for the state. And I think one of our upcoming challenges is looking at confined agricultural feeding operations, or CAFOs. Really, this is livestock reform. We know that a lot of these big livestock operators tend to have a lot of nutrient runoffs and pollution that come from their own operations. So we've heard from multiple farmers across the state that this is becoming a growing concern. So this is a new piece that we're tackling. We started tackling it last year. We have a lot of growing opposition with the livestock and meat industry. So there's some work to be done on that one. So seeing this as a long-term project that we're working on. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about zero waste and water. So we're still looking to continue driving our work around plastic reduction and other contaminants that end up in our systems. So one bill that we're hoping to pass in the next couple of months is the polystyrene foam ban, which would set the state of Illinois to phase out polystyrene foam at restaurants and retailers to ensure that we don't have this pollutant entering into our water streams. And on the same front, we're looking to continue strengthening our plastic bag reduction strategy by banning plastic bags on major retailers in the state of Illinois, and also doing a lot of work to address some of the ongoing issues where other pollutants are entering our water systems. And then finally, I'll close out with energy and transportation on the final slide. We know that with transportation and our power sector, those are two of the sectors that account for over 50% of greenhouse gases in the state of Illinois. So we've done a lot of work to roll up our sleeves to get the state to address this issue. I talked a little about the Climate and Equity Jobs Act. That has started to put us on a path to phase out coal and fossil fuels in the power sector, but there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we are expediting renewable energy projects and making sure that Community members also have access to energy efficiency um, programs within their um, utility providers. So been working very closely with a lot of our partners to drive the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. Sorry, that's a mouthful. To make sure that we're modernizing our transmission infrastructure and making it easier for make that connection. And one bill that I'm really excited for that I've been driving is the Public Transit and Governance Reform Funding Act. If you all live within the Chicagoland region, you might have heard that the public transit agencies that account for CTA, Metro, and PACE are facing a fiscal deficit and cliff that is coming up next year. And we're facing up to 30–40% cuts in our services. And we've been working on a policy to transform the governance structure and bring the money necessary to keep the system moving. Just knowing that public transit is one of the key components to ensure that we're taking people out of cars and reducing the amount of miles people travel on a year-to-year basis and helping reduce the greenhouse gases in transportation. So that is a bill that is being worked on for veto session that is coming up in the 3rd and 5th week in October. That will be the final vote on this year's General Assembly. And looking ahead into the future, we're looking to put a target of greenhouse gases on our transportation sector. So working closely with the Department of Transportation, I know ICCA was able to testify last week with the Blue Ribbon Commission that is putting together recommendations for the Department of Transportation on how to change some of their funding structures to ensure that we're reducing the amount of greenhouse gases. So I think there's a lot of work that we could do together. I'm really excited to build on this partnership. And I'll just close it up with a couple action items that would help us get these over the finish line. I mentioned a little bit about our Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. If y'all can help us take action tonight, or if you're on the recording tonight, there is that website on screen that will help y'all target your legislator to make sure that you encourage them to vote yes on the Clean, Reliable, and Affordability Act. I'll get that one day. And then you can also use the QR code to ensure that you're pushing your legislators to make sure that we are saving public transit. And for people who are downstate, we're also addressing public transit across the state. There is a lot of provisions in this bill that will make it easier for the over 50 transit agencies in the state to coordinate with each other to make sure that there's intercity rail and bus connection, and also working together on infrastructure and innovation. So really excited. And yeah, Marie, I can send a follow-up email with Frank with the information on these slides, but I'll pause there. Last slide is just me thanking y'all for inviting me here. I did mention at the top, there is a dinner coming up, September 19th. If you guys have time and want to meet legislators who are doing great work with the environment or partners within the IC scope, would definitely welcome y'all to come out to the dinner with us. It's known as the Environmental Prom. All the environmentalists in the state look their best, and we celebrate each other's wins and work collectively with each other to have one night where we can feel connected with each other in a fancy home. So thank you all, and again, appreciate the time with y'all here.
Yeah, thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, yeah, a lot to grasp there, a lot of good information. I'm gonna be following up with that, and you should hear some overlap between my presentation and Danny's, things like the wetlands and CEJA. But let me pull it up real quick. Okay. All right. Transition over to the screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, so before I get into this, right, I just wanted to give a little background on myself in the most concise way because I don't want to go too much over time. But my background is more health focused, right? As I mentioned, I'm from Waukegan, Illinois. I got a scholarship to get a master's degree from NYU, right, in a program that was a master's in public administration, but my focus was health policy and management. I always imagine myself, going and working in hospital administration and really looking out for the medically underserved populations. And after some work, in the hospitals, I decided that it would be best for me to look for work that was more integrative of environmental health, right? And that kind of, there's a lot of overlap, and ICCA really gets that. And I come from a community that has a tremendous amount of environmental issues, right, that I wasn't aware of when I was growing up, but now I have some more context with. And so I'm going to go through some specifics for the community that I come from, cover a little bit about what environmental justice is, and then talk about some of the wins, right? And a lot of that involves IEC and our other coalition partners, right? But I wanted to start with some EPA definitions, right? So we have a definition for environmental justice, which is something that's aspirational, right? It's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, right? This is the aspirational piece. It is the counter to environmental racism, right? Which is the placement of low income or minority communities in proximity to environmentally hazardous or degraded environments such as toxic waste, pollution, and urban decay. Okay, and then fence line communities and neighborhoods surrounding facilities that produce hazardous waste and which are directly affected by corporate waste. Okay, so the EPA uses a range of indicators, right? They have environmental indicators and socioeconomic indicators to determine which communities they consider environmental justice communities, right? Waukegan, Illinois, is one of those communities, right? According to its level of particulate matter and air toxics, cancer risks, wastewater discharge, hazardous waste proximity, right? And things like unemployment rate, percentage low income, percentage people of color, right? So so that was from the EPA, okay, but I love using this data provided from the Brushwood Center, which has been a big advocate for environmental justice here in Lake County, right? And they put out their Health Equity and Nature report in 2022, I believe. And when I first saw it, it was right after I moved back from New York, and it shook me, right? Because there were these clear illustrations of environmental racism, right? And environmental degradation. And as we know, right, climate and environment are indelibly linked. Okay. Both are, damage in one is related to damage in the other. Okay, but I wanted to show some specific Lake County trends. Okay, so on the left-hand side, right, you can see a graph that measures the level of the median household income across the county, right? So you can look at it as the darker the community, the higher the level of household income, right? Where the Tri-Cities, okay, which are Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion up here, but mostly Waukegan and North Chicago, which are the easternmost, right up against the lake, heavy population centers, and are also some of the poorest communities in the county, the poorest communities in the county, right? And when we look at that graph on the left, and we counter that with the graph on the right, which measures the amount of environmental inequity in Lake County, right? Systemic inequities. We can see an inverse relationship, right? That the lower the level of median household income in the community in Lake County, the higher the level of environmental inequities, right? The more overburdened the community is. Okay, and unfortunately, this isn't a Lake County specific trend. This is pretty much anywhere you look in the United States. Okay, let's look at a few other graphs here, right? So on the left-hand side, we have asthma prevalence. Okay, on the right-hand side, we have diabetes prevalence, right? And you may make the case that these are mostly behavior driven, diseases, ailments, right? But the science shows that both are linked to environment in more ways than one. Right. And we can see another clear trend, right? That the communities with the least amount of income, right, that are already environmentally overburdened in Lake County also have the highest asthma and diabetes rates. Okay. And and there's a lot of other data in the report. It's online. I'm just being brisk and for time. But it results in this trend here, right? Which is the 15-year gap in life expectancy between North Chicago and Lake Forest, which are less than 5 miles apart, right? And the 10-year gap in life expectancy between Waukegan and Lake Forest, right? So Lake County is one of the wealthiest counties in Illinois, if not the wealthiest. But you have these pockets, right, that have been designated to take the brunt of environmental degradation for the county. And for so long, right, the stories have not been told. Okay, so a joint study, right, conducted by the University of Michigan in partnership with the University of Montana. This was put out 2 year in 2023. Concluded that researchers found a consistent pattern over a 30-year period of placing hazardous waste facilities in neighborhoods where poor people and people of color live. Right? Hazardous waste sites, polluting industrial facilities, and other locally unwanted land uses are disproportionately located in non-white and poor communities, right? Waukegan is a community of immigrants, right? We're a community of refugees in many cases. Certainly the case for my family, right? My granddad was part of the last wave of the Great Migration, right? He came to Waukegan because he was redlined into Waukegan. He did not have an option. Okay, he was a sharecropper. He was a fisherman. He wanted to be near the water, right? He was placed away from the water. Okay, it altered his relationship to the land. The stream that he had to fish in was polluted, started to be heavily polluted a few years after he got to his Red Line neighborhood, right? So oftentimes these things are intentional, right? There are sacrifice zones that are created, right? Because the pollutants have to go somewhere, right? So when we look at Waukegan, we're talking about a community that has five of the active 13 Superfund sites in the state of Illinois, right? These are within a 5 mile radius of each other, okay? And they line our waterways, okay? This is the type of, city planning that, and state policy that has got us to this place, right? So we have five of them on the EPA's list. Okay, and these are sites where business was polluting the land, making money. They were employing people in the community. They allowed my grandparents and many other immigrant and refugee families to come to this area. But when they left, they were gone and they left their toxins in the soil, right? And this is something that we are still dealing with today. In fact, you cannot safely walk to Waukegan's beautiful beachfront because of the Superfund sites, right, that line the driveway to get down there. Okay, now, and I'm just talking about the Superfund sites, right? I'm not talking about the dozens of other toxic and hazardous facilities that we have in our community, right? And you're looking at pictures of one of them. Okay, this is the NRG, former coal-fired power plant. They're not burning coal anymore, but they are processing natural gas and producing diesel or burning diesel fuel, right? And they still have these huge coal ash ponds, which means that you know, we have one of the largest beaches in the state of Illinois, but we have access to just a fraction of it, right? Because this coal ash lines part of our lakefront and is so hazardous to human health that they can't allow people anywhere near it. Okay, and these are just some of the ways. This is a graphic provided by the Sierra Club called Coal Ash Man and was really helpful for us in organizing around this. And it just shows all of the different ways that coal ash impacts human health, right? None of them are good. Okay. So you couple this with the climate reality, right? So there was this landmark study published by the Environmental Law and Policy Center in 2022, I believe, called Rising Waters. climate change impacts and toxic risks to Lake Michigan's shoreline communities. And this was another, it blew my mind, right? Because I came from New York and was there, to see the sea level start to rise, all these markers on our coastline. I didn't know how it was going to impact Lake Michigan, right? And what this report summarizes, or what it hypothesizes, is that while we're not going to see a steady increase in water levels in Lake Michigan, what is likely to happen, what is already happening and is likely to continue, is more severe highs and more severe lows, right? So we could have a period where, the water is really, really high for a week and then it's really, really low. And scientists are saying this is even scarier than a steady rise because it's the unpredictability. Okay, and as I just showed you, right, we have all these Superfund sites on our shoreline. You can see them on this map as well, but we're not alone, right? If you look down the coastline into Chicago, you'll see that the poorer communities have a lot of these hazardous facilities at water level, right? Which means that if it rises and those things end up underwater, it could jeopardize the drinking water for millions and millions. Okay. So this is problematic for a whole host of reasons, right? In my environmental organizing over the past 3 years, I've drawn inspiration from indigenous people, right? And I understand that when you have um, hazards and chemicals that are actively polluting the natural environment that people live in, that cannot be removed from the health of human beings, right? This is something that that indigenous people understood on a deep, deep fundamental level. And it's something that I hope as a society, right, we can start to remember. Okay, I have this quote from a book called Native Science that I really recommend, Gregory Cajete. And he says that nature is not simply a collection of objects, but rather a dynamic, ever-flowing river of creation inseparable from our own perceptions, right? On the left-hand side, I have, very tangible ways that spending time in nature benefits human health, right? It helps us cope with pain, reduces stress, eases our heart rate, right? There's studies on this. Okay, but if you come from a community where anytime you go into a natural space, you have to worry about the water making you sick, or anytime you step out of your house and breathe the air, you have to worry about the chemicals in it, that's going to impact your relationship with it, right? So on the right-hand side, we have, everybody, a lot of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, he actually borrowed that heavily, right, from the Blackfeet Nation that he spent time with. Okay, and they believed that nature was a fundamental part in this goal of reaching cultural perpetuity. Okay, that it does not begin or end with the individual, that we're building towards something higher, right? And that's a lot of what I think environmental justice has to do with. So I know we're over time, so I'm gonna continue to get through this. But I wanted to bring an example, right? So when Danny talks about fighting for Illinois' wetlands and how only 10% of Illinois' original wetlands still exist, Waukegan is a great example of the dangers in this, right? So one of our Superfund sites, the only one that does not line Lake Michigan, is the one that was built in Waukegan's wetland. Okay, it was a 70-acre municipal and industrial waste site, only operated for a 10-year period, but that waste has been sitting in our wetlands for, the decades since, and for the decades since it's been leaching these toxins, neurotoxins, and other chemicals into our or creek, right, which flows through our entire city and empties into Lake Michigan, and it's also been producing landfill gases. Okay, and you can see on the left-hand side, there was a photo, there was a story that I participated in with the Chicago Sun-Times about the landfill and its dangers and wanting the waste removed, but grappling with the reality that nobody wants that waste in their community, right? And so getting the waste moved has been a real challenge, right? Something that I don't think even the local politicians are willing to face at this time, right? But there is a silver lining, right? So the EPA is they're dredging the leaching zone and progressive steps, right? So city leaders, with the help of IEC and other folks in ICJC, have proposed a plan, right? Build a solar field on top of the landfill, right? And use the energy from that solar field to offset the energy costs for poor working class residents of the surrounding community, right? So this is something that it may not be a perfect option, right? But it's starting to get towards a solution, right? And so I want to, first part of the presentation is kind of bleak. I want to talk about some of the successes in this work since I've been a part of it for the past couple of years, right? So I talked about the coal plant. Okay, we had a major win in 2024, right? This is a picture on the left-hand side of the community mobilized, right, for a public comment period with the Illinois Pollution Control Board. We brought out about 100 people, right? And this is something that I imagine in the future ICCA members and board members show up to and lend their voices to, right? Because we were successful. Okay, the Illinois Pollution Control Board um, talked about the power of the public comments in their decision, right, to deny this exemption. Okay, but with that win, right, we understand that NRG has endless money and they're already filing another lawsuit, right? So these are not sprints, right? These are long slog fests. Okay. So that's the case, right? We talk about ETO, right? I haven't even brought in the sterilizers that we have two of them in our community, right? And it first burst on the radar in 2019, right? You had these studies showing ethylene oxide, right, which is a chemical used in the sterilization of medical equipment primarily, but it's linked to cancer, right? And especially prolonged exposure to it. I know IEC did a lot of work around this, other coalition partners, right, to put in these really strict regulations that are supposed to cut fugitive emissions by 100%, reduce emissions by 99.9%, which is a huge win, right? But there is still an ongoing long-term cancer risk for residents, the almost 5,000 residents that live within zero point 0.7 miles of that facility. Right. And we know that a lot of the people who live around there are living in either temporary housing or low income housing. Right. So the risk still remains, even though we're cutting into it, we're winning battles, but not wars yet. Okay, I'll talk about another example, right, related to transportation. Okay, I mentioned our asthma risk, right? That we have a diesel burning, plant in our community. Um, Through the tireless work of Danny and so many other coalition partners, right, PACE has made the really progressive step to build the infrastructure to start electrifying their buses, right? And they've said that their Waukegan branch is going to be a zero emissions only facility by 2027. Okay. And this is what, when you start to see, okay, environmental justice is coming, right? We're going to start doing things in a different way. They were explicit. Okay, Waukegan is a community that is, suffered the environmental brunt. We're going to start there. Okay. Another example, right? This landmark bill that Danny and so many others did work on, which is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, right? Which I'm seeing the repercussions of. I had a cousin go through the program, right? And has more job opportunities now than he did ever in his life, right? A $1 billion investment in creating clean energy jobs and environment and economic development to reduce state greenhouse gases by 40%. Okay, College of Lake County, right, which is the best option for a lot of young people coming out of Waukegan, got $3.5 million dollars. Okay, and they've already trained a few cohorts of young people to take on those, to be prepared for those clean energy jobs in the future. Okay, and I think this is my last slide. Yeah. So how you can get involved, right? We're already seeing the requests, right? We're already our name is out there. Okay, so coalition partners are tapping us. They want us to participate. They want us to speak, right? We can, attend city council meetings in our own communities. We can respond to my emails, when I reach out and ask folks to lend their time and their voices. Ultimately, what we're working towards is a community, an environment, a culture where the easiest choice is the healthiest choice, right? And that comes from Mary Bassett, who's the former commissioner of New York State Department of Health. And so, yeah, and that's a picture of me down at Lobby Day in Springfield fighting for wetlands protections. And I will stop it there. And that concludes our presentations. And I know we're over time. Bobby, do you think we have a minute or two for questions or
Yeah,
comments?
if there's any questions, I do want to respect people's time though, and I like that quote, Frank. That's a great way to end it.
Thank you.
Um, and if there's no questions though, we'll share this this presentation with the greater membership and really look forward to fielding any comments or questions or opportunities to get engaged and look for more things to come. So with that, I want to wish everybody good night and hopefully talk to everyone in some capacity here soon. Take care.
All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody have a good night.